So you're probably wondering if the a7 III is really worth spending that extra cash on instead of getting the a6600. And if you're anything like me, there's three main things that are really important to you that you want to compare side by side in order to make your decision. Well, that is exactly what we're going to be doing in this video. We're going to be comparing the image quality, battery life, and autofocus, and we're going to be starting with image quality. When I talk about image quality, I'm not just talking about 4K, I'm talking about colors, I'm talking about dynamic range, I'm talking about how much can we crank up the ISO before it produces noise. Basically everything that's got to do with how good our video looks. Now let's start with the main difference, and that is the sensor. The a6600 has an APS-C format, whereas the a7 III is a full frame camera. What does that mean? That means that the sensor of the a7 III is 2.3 times bigger than the a6600 sensor. What does that mean? There's two things that I think are relevant to you without going into any of the technicalities, because we don't care about that. We just want to know if a camera is good. An APS-C camera is also referred to as a crop camera, which means that your image or your video will be cropped in, and the crop factor depends on the brand. For example, Canon, I believe, has a crop factor of 1.6, and Sony, so in this case the a6600, has a crop factor of 1.5. What this means is that if you put a lens of 24 millimeters on a Sony a6600, the equivalent will be 24 times 1.5, the crop factor is 35 millimeters. So this means that if you choose to buy the a6600 and you buy a 24 millimeter lens, you're actually getting a 35 millimeter equivalent lens. And a full frame camera, in this case the a7 III, doesn't have a crop factor, which means that 24 millimeters is actually 24 millimeters. And if you do want to achieve a focal length of 24 millimeters on the a6600, you actually have to buy a 16 millimeter lens, for example the Sigma 16 millimeter 1.4. The second thing that I want you to consider is whether or not you shoot in low light situations, because if you do, a full frame camera will be better. If we assume that the a7 III and the a6600 have the same number of pixels, the pixels on a full frame sensor are going to be bigger in order to cover the entire sensor, and when the pixels are bigger, it means that they can capture more light. On paper, the Sony a7 III is a clear winner. It has higher ISO capabilities, less noise, better in low light, it has better dynamic range. But what does it actually look like? Here's two videos. Let's call them A and B. Which one do you think is the a6600 and which one is the a7 III? They're both shot in 4K, they're both shot in 25 frames per second and in a neutral color profile, also known as PP0. Camera A is the a6600 and camera B is the a7 III. Honestly, considering the price tag, I was very surprised to barely notice a difference between the two. Let's talk about autofocus. Autofocus is so important, and I've had so many issues with the a7 III. In my personal experience, the a6600 has a lot better autofocus. It has eye autofocus in video mode, whereas the a7 III only has phase autofocus, and it has failed me so many times. I have trust issues with my a7 III. I do want to say that we have resolved all of the autofocus issues on the a7 III. I do not have any issues with it anymore because now I shoot in airplane mode all the time, which I think you shouldn't have to. So therefore, I don't think that the a7 III deserves to win this round. I also want to say that maybe this is a me problem, but I have found some articles online that were discussing the same kind of problems that I had with autofocus on the a7 III. So a6600, congratulations, you win a point. Both cameras use the exact same battery, but does that mean that the battery life is also the same? Well, I put this to the test and I recorded in 4K on both cameras and just waited until one of the cameras died. The results weren't that significant. The a7 III did die first, but the a6600 could only roll for another 15 to 20 minutes before dying as well. One thing that is really interesting to note is the fact that the a7 III has a 30-minute recording limit, so I had to record it over and over again, whereas the a6600 doesn't have a recording limit, which is, in my opinion, a huge win if you're doing talking head videos like this or interviews. I know which camera I think is best, but the question is, which one is best for you? I did make two reviews, one on the a6600 and one on the a7 III, so go make sure you check them out. And of course, before you leave, make sure to give this video a like. Let me know in the comments which camera you think won. And of course, make sure that you hit subscribe so you won't miss out on new videos.